Is Milei the greatest politician of the 21st century because he's standing on the shoulders of John Locke? Just when Marxists, Edmund Burkes, and Jeremy Benthamists thought they'd killed off John Locke, Milei resurrects the spirit of John Locke.
And we are returning to the state its primary function, which is the defense of life, liberty, and the property of individuals. The state of law is a concept that is based on the fundamental idea that all citizens have inalienable natural rights, among which is the right to life, liberty, and property.
While Milei does not specifically talk about John Locke, he often talks about the 1837 generation in Argentina that were heavily influenced by John Locke and wrote the first Argentine constitution that propelled Argentina to become one of the richest nations in the world in a few short decades.
But it is also true that at some point there may be a trend change, a structural change, and a change that starts a new era. In fact, the 37th generation was precisely working to make it different this time as well. That did it because when in 1860 the Alvadi Constitution was put in place, Argentina went from a barbaric country to a first world power in 35 years.
Milei also considers Murray Rothbard to be one of his greatest intellectual influences, and Rothbard spent a lot of time talking about Locke and natural rights. By the way, natural rights should not be confused with natural law. The two are not the same. So who is this John Locke character? Well, Thomas Jefferson, the second president of the United States, called him one of the three greatest men who ever lived. Jefferson also included Isaac Newton in this list. Isaac Newton is perhaps the greatest scientist who ever lived. Newton and Locke were contemporaries, and they were friends. John Locke is the greatest political and legal philosopher ever lived, in my opinion. Looking at the political philosophers who came before Locke, there was Aristotle, who didn't ask the question, why do we need a government? Just suggested what was the better forms of government. And then there was Thomas Aquinas, who basically gave us the soft version of the divine right of kings. Thomas Hobbes wrote Utopia, which is a political philosophy that's appropriate for ants, but not for rational beings like humans. After Locke, we can talk about the parasite Karl Marx, who pushed the theory of hatred, resentment, and envy, and contributed nothing to political philosophy. Locke, in formulating his theory of government, starts with the idea of man in a state of nature, which is like man on a deserted island, which, interestingly enough, is very similar to Robinson Crusoe economics, which Milei does talk about. This man on a deserted island has perfect freedom. No one can take his life, his liberty, or his property. So those are his three fundamental rights. So the question is, why do we ever have a government? And what is the purpose of this government? When men live together in groups, some of them will not respect the rights of others. Locke argues that we could end up spending all our time trying to protect our property, our life, and our rights. Thus, governments are created to secure these rights. Thus, a proper government is one that is created to secure your life, liberty, and property. In order to have an orderly, properly functioning government, you give up the right to delayed retaliatory force. Locke was also the first one to provide a logical framework for why we have property and who has property rights in something. Basically, what he said is that if you make something productive, then you have property rights in that thing. Thus, if you build a boat, you have property rights in that boat. And if you trap a deer, you have the property rights in that deer. Before Locke, property rights were whatever the king or government said they were. We can see in Milei's policies the influence of John Locke's ideas. For instance, his government's flag plan, which has reduced murders in Rosario by over 60%. Milei talks about this plan in terms of reducing insecurity, not in terms of keeping people safe. In other words, he's talking about protecting people's rights. When you talk about safety instead of protecting people's rights, you open up a Pandora's box of problems. Milei also closed a number of ministries in Argentina which were inconsistent with Locke's definition of a proper government, including the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Women, Ministry of Culture. He also eliminated the state broadcasting system, with the equivalent of PBS in the U.S. A publicly funded broadcasting system is inconsistent with both Locke and the idea is freedom, it's only appropriate for a totalitarian state. Before we look at Locke's impact in history, let's take a look at his biography.
John Locke is the father of classical liberalism. His core political ideas and doctrines are really at the heart of constitutional law and Anglo-American jurisprudence.
British philosopher John Locke was born on August 29, 1632, in the county of Somerset, England. After attending schools in London and Oxford, he received his Masters of Arts from the prestigious Christ College.
In 1668, he was elected into the Royal Society, where he studied medicine and graduated as a physician in 1684.
While Locke was studying medicine, he met Anthony Ashley Cooper, who persuaded Locke to move to London and be his personal physician. Lord Ashley would later become the first Earl of Shaftesbury.
As Lord Shaftesbury's stature grew, Locke's responsibilities went well beyond personal secretary or physician. Locke became a government official. He was in charge of collecting data on the colonies, and in fact becomes a political operative, and eventually becomes a revolutionary.
Lord Shaftesbury was tried for treason and in 1682 fled to Holland. Locke followed a year later, and there wrote his philosophical work, An Essay Concerning Human Understanding.
Locke formulates one of his most famous notions, that there are no innate ideas, that man is born a blank slate. This notion, known as empiricism, directly challenges the idea I learn things through my reason alone.
After what later became known as the Glorious Revolution of 1688, Locke returned to England and published 2 treatises of civil government, which became one of history's most famous works on social contract theory.
John Locke introduced the idea of personal sovereignty. He said that each human being should have powers of self-determination.
Locke rejected divine rights of kings theory. Instead, he argued that God gave rights to individuals against the government, not that God gave the king power.
John Locke was an intellectual hero for the American founding fathers, in particular James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and Alexander Hamilton.
In his later years, John Locke wrote other important works promoting religious tolerance and new approaches to education. John Locke died at the age of 72 on October 28, 1704, in Essex, England.
Locke's ideas were the basis of the English Bill of Rights, which became the basis of the American Bill of Rights, including the right to freedom of expression and the right to bear arms. Locke also had a profound impact on English common law. He is cited numerous times in Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, the definitive book on English common law, and highly influential even today. Many Americans are confused, believing that the U.S. Constitution's Bill of Rights was the main thing securing their rights. But in fact, it was Locke's determination of property rights as incorporated in English common law that protected most of the rights. This is why a number of other English common law countries that didn't have a Bill of Rights also became free and prosperous. It is also why Marxists are so intent on destroying property rights. Locke's ideas spawned the Industrial Revolution, first in England and then the United States, then other English-speaking countries, and then around the world. It's no surprise that Argentina became prosperous when it adopted Locke's ideas in its Constitution of 1860. Locke's ideas are the foundation of capitalism. As this chart shows, which is Milei's favorite chart, capitalism increased the per capita income 13 times since 1800, while the population grew by 7 times. This destroys the Marxist myth of the carrying capacity of Earth. So not only did Locke's ideas form the basis of the greatest, most prosperous nation the world has ever seen, but it created capitalism, which lifted 95% of the world out of poverty. Let's compare that to Marx, who has been the dominant political and cultural philosopher of the last 100 years. Marxist regimes killed over 100 million people in the 20th century, impoverished billions of people, and through their Luddite policies are responsible for the death of billions of humans. And into this sea of gloomy evil rides Milei on the shoulders of Locke. Given Locke's track record, how could Milei not be successful? Long live freedom, damn it!